What's going on, guys? So today's video is going to be a little different. This is going to be more of like a talking point, and it's not one that I've always really wanted to do on my channel, but I've never really just done it. And I've seen a lot of talk on the internet recently, and it constantly opens up the question in my mind. And the question is the title of the video, which is, what is horror? And I am a huge horror fan, as most of you know that have been following me for a really long time. When I revitalized my channel and started posting regularly a while back, it was in the month of October. And what really kind of got me dedicated to being on YouTube again is the horror genre. It's something that's always been very important to me. And at a very young age, my parents, I very vividly remember them when I was probably 5 or 6 years old, showing me the original 13 Ghosts, the black and white 13 Ghosts, and I remember not being able to sleep because I was absolutely horrified by what was going on screen. And obviously, you know, you watch something like that now, it's so cheesy and goofy, and my tastes have changed. The types of movies I like have changed over the years, and horror is such a fascinating genre to me because of how much that it has changed over time, and the scope and the lens of what a horror movie can be has changed. And I think what's interesting about the culture we live in now is people can get very gatekeepy about the horror genre, and like, is this horror? Is this not horror? What's elevated horror? What's art house horror? What's traditional horror? And people try to subcategorize the idea of what they think a horror movie can be. And so I think it puts into question an even larger thing, which is like, at the end of the day, what does it really matter? Honestly, like, genres of filmmaking are so interesting to me because so many movies can encapsulate a huge amount of genres in one film. I think of something recently like Everything Everywhere All at Once. Can you really call it just an action film? No, because there's beautiful drama in it. Can you just call it a drama? No, because there's a ton of comedy in it. It covers a scope of so many different genres in one film that it's silly to even try to classify it to one genre. So looking at that through the perspective of horror, I think recently a perfect example is Kyle Ball's Skinamarink. I did a video on this a while back. Skinamarink is the newest indie, low-budget horror film that is way more of an art house horror movie, and I absolutely adored this because it used art house filmmaking to tap into a segment of my brain personally that brought back memories of being haunted as a child, being in a room alone, waking up in the middle of the night, constantly feeling like you're being watched, tapping into some of the most unbridled fear possible. And while I don't think that movie's a jump scare laden fest, it's a fear that creeps up inside you. It's something that sticks with you. It's not like a James Wan movie like an Insidious, where I love that movie, and there were moments when I watched it the first time that I got scared and it made me jump and it made me uncomfortable. But it's not like I'm sitting at home thinking about it for 2 months after I watch it. It's an amazing film in its own regard. But Skinamarink is something I thought about for months after watching it because of how primal that is. And so both of those movies are horror films to me because they invoke very different emotions about what horror can be. And I think horror can encapsulate so much more than that. I think about the rise of filmmakers like Robert Eggers or Ari Aster recently in the A24 scope, where they're making much more indie art house horror in the sense that it's much more story driven. There's elements of horror in it, like you look at something like Hereditary. Hereditary, for the first hour and 10 minutes of that film, it's a familial drama. It's showing people go through trauma, experiencing real grief and real life terror, and then turning it into something supernatural as an allegory for, you know, real life horror. And isn't that horror in and of itself? I always want to ask that question when people try to say films like that aren't horror, because is not experiencing loss and grief and suffering real life horror and real life terror? I think about an A24 film like Room starring Brie Larson. That to me is a horror film, because that is a person who as a teenager was taken away from their family, raped, gave birth to a child in captivity, had to try to raise this child in captivity, not to scare them to know that there's an outside world, because it would scare them to death about the fact they were being taken captive by this horrible, awful human being. There is nothing more horrific than that to me. That is real horror. And so I find this whole conversation of that's not horror to be really silly and stupid, because horror impacts people in so many different ways. And I think the thing about horror that has always really stuck with me as a viewer personally is that horror seems to always come from a place of lived trauma or something someone was going through. I think about Stephen King writing The Shining. When he came up with that idea, he was staying at a hotel and was having nightmares, and he penned those nightmares to paper, and how that experience spawned one of the greatest horror books and films ever made. You think about a director like Mike Flanagan, who writes these really interpersonal stories that are so beautiful about families going through these horrible traumas together that end up having a supernatural twist that is almost an allegory for what they're experiencing. And horror is such an amazing vehicle to be able to explore those avenues in a way that exaggerates those emotions to a level that you can't really feel in real life. And that's why I love horror so much, but I do think it's silly in the question of what is horror to say that horror can only be one thing. Horror isn't just Freddy Krueger coming to you in your dreams and trying to kill you. Horror isn't just Jack Torrance as a father going crazy and trying to murder his entire family. Horror isn't just a baby being stolen from a family and it tearing each other apart internally. It's all of those things. It's every bit and piece of what I've discussed coming together to create this beautiful genre that I feel like, for the most part, does an amazing job at binding this community of people who I feel like what horror lovers have in common is we've all experienced something. Whatever that might be in your life, you've experienced something that has gravitated you towards this genre, that it has such a profound impact on you. And I had a really great conversation on my podcast with the Addams Family filmmakers, and John made a really great point about how, you know, the horror community is great because they'll go watch movies. We're a very dedicated fan base that will go watch virtually anything in the genre, even if it has bad reviews, because we have a hope that something will cling to us and something will connect to us on a level like so many of these other films that we've watched throughout the time that we've been fans of the genre. And so I thought this was just a really interesting talking point, and I would love to read in the comments what horror is to you. What experiences with horror have kind of shaped you to love the genre, because I like to see this as a conversation. My favorite part about YouTube is reading all of you guys' comments and hearing your perspectives on the films, and whether we agree or disagree isn't the most important part to me. It's hearing your thoughts and how something has impacted you, and I think that's the most beautiful part of this whole thing. So I hope you enjoyed me on my soapbox today, talking about what I believe horror is, which is, it's a little bit of everything. It's whatever it means to you, and I think that's the beauty of the genre. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, it helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new videos, and I look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.